Perfect. I'll give everybody like one more minute and then we'll go ahead and get started so that we can stay on time with our webinar. So my name is Lane Dilla. I am an assistant professor at the University of Colorado, and it's my pleasure today to host this SAM approved research learning series. We're going to talk about the NIH loan repayment program and how best to get your application accepted and get funding for your research. With me today, I have the pleasure of having Dr. Korn. Dr. Korn came from the NINDS as director of the Office of Training, Career Development, and Workforce Diversity, or now the Office of Training and Workforce Development. He joined that program in January 2006. And at NINS, Dr. Korn still oversees all the training and research education programs that do not specifically target the goal of diversifying the workforce, including all mechanisms that support both individuals and institutional programs, as well as the loan repayment program and the Landis Award Program. Dr. Korn recently launched a major effort through the training programs intended to improve the rigorous scientific research done by both trainees and established investigators. So we are very happy to have him. And a little bit later, we will have Dr. Elizabeth Berner joining us. She is an associate professor of the clinical emergency medicine at the Keck School of Medicine at the University of Southern California. She is also the research director for the Department of Emergency Medicine and a faculty instructor for the SCCTSI Workforce Development Corps. Dr. Berner has previously received the loan repayment, and so she now serves as an ambassador and is kind of going to give us a perspective from someone who had an award. And with that, I will let Dr. Korn take it away.
Thanks, Lane. Thanks for having me. I'll also put in a plug. You didn't mention it. I was expecting you to mention it, that we are in the midst of starting a national K-level program for emergency medicine. So keep your eyes open for that. Okay, so what I'm here to talk to you about is Julie. I'm here to talk to you about the really what the review process is looking for in a loan repayment program. And it's actually quite simple. So just to give you a little background, the loan repayment program exists. It was started by Congress, and the whole point of it was to retain health professionals and research who might leave for more lucrative careers. Talking to you all as physicians, you are one of those groups who might have gotten a lot of debt going to medical school or wherever, and you may not make as much money doing research as if you went out and were purely a clinician, and you might choose not to do research for financial reasons. And that's really the reason the LRP exists, is to get rid of your debt and have that not be an issue for you when you're deciding between a research career and a purely clinical career. Now, NIH there's a little, I was going to say confusion. There's no confusion, but, to NINDS, a health professional is somebody who has a professional career in the health sector. And for the purposes here, that means clinicians. And NIH will support PhD-only scientists with this. We don't particularly think of them as health professionals, but from an NIH point of view, they are. But, speaking from an NINDS-centric position, our first priority is clinicians, and I'll get to that in a minute. Across NIH, other institutes may or may not prioritize clinicians with respect to PhDs. They never prioritize PhDs over clinicians, but they may not have any priority. So here's our priority is, if you're a clinician with a K award or beyond, but especially with a K award, you're almost automatic for getting loan repayment because you've proven you, in essence, are going for a research career. You have a good training plan. You have a good research plan because you wouldn't have gotten your K award without it. And so there's just no reason for individuals like that to not get a K award. Um, there are kind of two groups in the next tier, which is pre-K clinicians that with a clear demonstrated dedication. So what does that mean? If you've never done research or never accomplished anything really in research and you raise your hand and say, hey, can I have my loans paid off? The answer is likely to be no. The what we need is for an individual to show through their experience and their choices and their research project and their mentorship that they are on a path to succeeding as a research scientist. And so that's what I mean by demonstrated dedication is you're on that path and have all the indicators of getting to where you're going. Simultaneously with that, there are lots of individuals with K awards who are not clinicians, who bring diverse perspectives to science. And I really mean that term. It's not really a euphemism. There can be all kinds of perspectives that are being brought that are not standard in science. And we also prioritize that. And then, this money, we have an amount of money given to us by Congress that we need to spend on the LRP. And when we run out of our first two priorities, then we start funding the PhD scientists. And so that's our priority. So, I mentioned this, NINDS is really only seeking to support individuals who are on a path to developing their own research career. We're not looking to intentionally fund collaborators. We're not looking to intentionally fund site PIs. We're putting our money into people who are going to lead and be creative. And that's not at all to say that those other contributions are unimportant or less important. It's a question of where you're prioritizing putting your money. But in practice, it's not that we necessarily care what you do with your lives. I mean, we do care, but you get to do what you want with your lives. But it means that you're going to get the training to be capable of being an independent and a successfully funded research scientist. If you choose not to be, that's your business, and that's not our business. But we at least expect you to get the training to be able to do that if you want it. So what happens to your application? Well, you submit it. It goes out to reviewers, external reviewers. They read it. They give it a score. They have a very brief critique, and I mean very brief, and basically justifying their score. And they send it back, and program gets it. Program is us at NINDS or at an institute. We get the score, we get their critique, and then we layer the priorities on top. So we don't just go in score order. We go in score order, but we pluck out the clinicians first, the clinicians with Ks, the clinicians who are almost at Ks, and we layer our priority list on top of the score and the critique. And then a decision gets made, up or down, about a particular application. Now, you don't get a written critique. And so people who don't get the award when they apply, of course, want to know why not. And you don't get any kind of written critique, but you get an email saying you're welcome to contact the LRP liaison at the institute you applied to or was reviewed at. And you can do that and contact that person. In general, with NIH, you're always best off contacting by email first, not by phone. Most of us don't pick up the phone, but you can send an email saying, can we talk about it? And the answer will be yes. And then, depending on the institute, you'll get more or less extensive an explanation. And some institutes will give you very little, and some will give you a lot, and it's the whole spectrum. And as I said, we won't give you anything in writing, but we will discuss with you by phone what the problems were, what prevented you from being funded, and what you can do to change that. And as you'll see, it might be just a question of waiting, or it might be fixing something. And so what are we looking for? And I use this word compelling a few times in this slide set. I don't usually use that word, but it really is the issue in an LRP. It's about being compelling, that you're in serious pursuit of an independently funded research career that takes a good project that will get you there. It takes good mentorship. It takes a good training plan. And you have to have some experience. As I said, you can't just have never done research and raise your hand and say, will you please pay off my loans? The answer will be no. You need to get in the saddle, do some research, and have a good plan to get where you're going. And all of these components count. And there's no percentage, one counting more than another. They just all count. So what are some of the common causes? And this is from NINDS. All institutes are different. Every institute handles these differently. But I can tell you for NINDS, the major reasons for not getting it for a clinician or anybody is, number one, you're still a student. I don't know that we've ever given LRP support to somebody who's still a student. And simply the reason for that is there's no reason to believe that somebody who's in medical school is actually going to pursue a career in research. And that includes MD, PhD students. They could come out of medical school and never do research again. And it's likely they don't even know it. And so we're waiting around to see who really invests themselves in becoming a scientist. Again, pre-K clinicians who do not have a source of funding that they had to compete for, they're not yet ready for whatever reason. It's not that we care about the funding at all. We're not looking at funding as a litmus test. But what funding does is it says, wow, you must have had a pretty good plan. And so we will fund unfunded pre-Ks. And so I hesitated to use that word, but it's really, it's one word that indicates, do you have a good plan all around? A poorly conceived project we won't fund because you're not going to get anywhere with a poorly conceived project. And then there's number two below, which is a poor training and mentorship plan. And this is very common. If you don't have a good mentor and a good mentorship plan and a good training plan, then how are you going to get where you're going? And one of the things lack of a plan indicates is that neither the candidate nor the mentor has thought very hard about this. Because typically when people think things, they write them down. So, and a poor project can be a part of this, right? The reason you have a poor project is your mentor hasn't helped you develop a good one. So again, it's this entire package. Are you on the path to getting to where you're going, which in the end is becoming a successful scientist? A little more on this poor training mentorship plan. My feeling is the LRP application has a flaw in it, and that's that it doesn't really make it clear to people that something much should be said about it. And so it's not always the candidate or the mentor that's at fault for this. They don't really know that they're supposed to write something about it. But usually people write something a little bit, and sometimes that little bit is not very good, and sometimes that little bit is okay. But what you really do need to pay a little bit of text to this idea of how are you going to get the training you need to get where you're going. It does not have to be long. It can be a short paragraph, but it should be well thought out. It should be a well-conceived paragraph. Here's where I'm going and here's how I'm going to get there. Not in great detail, but just to make sense to reviewers. And the other thing is you need a plan from the mentor. How am I going to help this person get where they're going? And quite often a mentor statement is, wow, I just met this person and they're wonderful and I'm happy to have them with me. And you're not going to get funded if that's what the mentor is saying, because there's no indication that the mentor's thought about you at all or how to help you get where you're going. So You need a good training or mentorship plan from both you and your mentor. Again, not at all long. It can be a paragraph, a small paragraph, but it needs to be thoughtful. And if you don't receive support, and again, I'm speaking for NINDS, and I'm sure there are many institutes like us and some that are not, we actually love talking to you about getting LRP support. It's a population we like speaking to because, you care about getting your loans paid off. And to be honest, I personally don't care about you getting your loans paid off. But what I do care about is that you become a successful research scientist. And if you write an LRP application that helps you get your loans paid off, it's also an indication to us that you're on a path to becoming a successful research scientist. So we love helping you figure out what is it you need to do for your application to be successful. Because if you're successful at getting the LRP, in our view, there's a really good chance that you're on the road to being a successful research scientist. And that's what we care about. I'm actually not the contact anymore for the LRP. Tish Wygand, who's the deputy director in the training office at NINDS, has come back. She was here. She handled the LRP. She went away into pharma for a few years. I took them back. She came back. I handed them back to her. We both love talking to you about it, but she right now is the one you'd be speaking to, and there's her contact information. So with that, I'll stop.
Thank you, Dr. Korn. That was wonderful. So now we're going to turn it over to Dr. Berner, who's going to give us another perspective about the program from someone who's had a loan repayment award.
Just wanted to double check that my audio is kicking in, right? So I'm actually speaking as a successful applicant from a while ago, but also as an ambassador of the loan repayment program. So those of us who have received loan repayment awards in the past and have an interest in getting more people on board with reducing their educational debt and helping to support your decision to stay in academic medicine and research are supported by the NIH with resources, not with necessarily financial support, to evangelize on this topic and really help keep clinician investigators on the research track, despite some of the lucrative offers from other fields. So really what I'm here to talk about is the nuts and bolts of the loan repayment program. I think Dr. Korn did an amazing job talking to us about the NIH's strategy on this and why it's important to the NIH. But you need to know as an applicant, like what you have to do to make this work and why it's worth the investment of your time to prepare the award.
Right.
So who is eligible for this? Currently, it funds over 2,000 researchers per year. They are all people with a terminal degree at the doctoral level. So an MD, a PhD, a PharmD, or potentially, a terminal doctoral degree from outside the US sometimes have different terms that apply to them, but whatever that terminal doctoral degree is, you can also be a combo of these. You could be an MD PhD or an MD PharmD, but what is really important is that you're dedicating your time towards a substantial research project. You do need to be a US citizen or a long-term permanent resident to apply, and that's consistent with NIH funding on early stage investigators across the board. And I think one of the key highlights here is that the research is for 20 hours per week. What your institution needs to certify is that you are contributing a substantial portion, at least 20 hours a week, towards a research project and a growing research agenda. One question that I've heard come up and that I wanted to explicitly address is about the NIH loan repayment program in this era of current expansion of public service loan forgiveness. So the public service loan forgiveness is, a program that after 10 years of on-time repayment at an income-based level, your loan is forgiven. There were some recent changes in the past year or two that relaxed some of the repayment requirements. And it's important to understand that the loan repayment program does not conflict with the public service loan forgiveness. The loan repayment program pays your loan payments on your behalf on a quarterly basis, including the federal and state taxes. That's different than public service loan forgiveness, where the rest of your loan is forgiven. And so I wanted to make sure that anybody who's viewing this is aware, these are not the same program. They don't conflict with each other. They have different purposes, and you can receive both. There are other service-based loan repayment and loan forgiveness programs available through local counties and state governments. These generally do conflict with the NIH loan repayment requirements, because these service-based loan repayment programs typically are related to providing clinical care in under-resourced areas, not to conducting research. So definitely check those criteria when you're making decisions about what type of support you're applying for to help you with your educational debt. So how much will the NIH pay on your behalf? They will pay up to 50% of your debt, up to $50,000 per year, initially for 2 years. So that is up to $100,000 over the initial 2-year award period. Additionally, they pay federal and state taxes up to 39%, because this is taxable income that you're receiving. This award is being paid directly on your behalf to your loan servicer, and it is taxable. So the taxes are paid up to 39%. That amount that's paid, that up to $50,000 per year, is based on a ratio of your income to your debt. And your educational loan debt must equal at least 20% of your annual salary. For most of us freshly out of training, that's not an issue, but if you need some help with calculating that, there's a loan calculator on the loan repayment information website that can help you, with understanding what your potential award might be if you were awarded. But for this maximum benefit, you would have to have at least $200,000 in debt to be able to get that $50,000 per year. After the initial award that lasts for 2 years, there's a competitive renewal process, assuming that you still have remaining debt to apply, these funds towards. They won't just give you money. Once you're out of debt, you are out of loan repayment program eligibility. It's a single annual application cycle, so it comes up every year. It starts on September 1st every year, federal holidays withstanding, and ends in mid-November. So for this year, the deadline is November 16th. There are different subcategories of awards to apply to, and we'll go through what those are. And those different categories of awards can be housed under just about all of the NIH institutes and centers. And so you pick an award category, but then you also select up to 2 NIH institute or centers that you would like your award reviewed by. So how do you apply? Well, you need to, if you haven't started already, immediately get on the website and start the process of developing an application. You do have to pick a loan repayment subcategory, so we'll talk about what those are. I would definitely, the next step after that would be to confirm your potential institute and center priorities. Make sure that you generally align with what the aims of their research are. And as Dr. Korn suggested, reach out to the contact at your preferred institutes or centers. And I've included the link and the QR code there for you to see the contact at each of the different institutes and centers. It's an online process to apply. You do need an ERA Commons login to do so. So if you don't already have an ERA Commons login, you need to get one right away. And I've included the QR code and link for that as well. And that's a process that can take a few weeks at times. So you need to get started on that process immediately if you haven't done so already. And the reason you need that is that Assist is the online program used for application, and it is housed in the NIH ERA Commons, server, I guess is the term you would use. And so you need to have that account on that program to be able to apply. Something important if you're coming from an institution where there hasn't been a lot of loan repayment awardees in the past, is that a business official at your institution who certifies that you are conducting research for at least 20 hours a week also needs to have a Commons ID login. And so if you don't know who your business official is, you need to find out right away, and you need to get their Commons ID now. Right. The rest of the application is up to you, and you're going to do a great job developing it and developing a compelling reason why you are going to be an independent investigator and the path that you're taking to that. But you can't control your institution, right? And so you need to make sure that these things that are relying on other people at your institution get started immediately. So that's the kind of some of the nuts and bolts on that side. But what you also have to decide is which one of the loan repayment subcategories you want to apply for. There's clinical research, pediatric research, health disparities research, research in emerging areas critical to human health, awards to support those from clinically disadvantaged backgrounds, and then contraception and infertility research. The first four are reviewed by the individual institutes and centers. The last two are a little bit different. So the clinical disadvantaged backgrounds is reviewed by NIMHD only, and contraception and infertility research is only reviewed by the NICHD. And so you will have, a little bit different if those are the two categories you're considering applying under. You have a specific institute and center you will be assigned to for review, as opposed to the other award categories, which are housed under, all of the institutes and centers. And I thought actually, Dr. Korn, I really appreciated your comments about this, about, that there's not necessarily a pie that belongs to each of these awards, that it's more about supporting investigators generally. And I thought that was, a good information for those applying to have is like, I think a lot of us stress about which loan repayment subcategory to apply to. And what's more important is really showing that compelling research and plan for mentorship and developing skills. So I really appreciate you coming today and speaking to us about that. There is a dashboard, right? So you can check out the dashboard of where loan repayment awards have come from, which subcategories, the success rates, the total funding amount, a lot of interesting information, that is great to look at. But I think you really do need to take that with a grain of salt, because if you look through this, this dashboard, it actually looks like the National Institutes for Minority and Health Disparities had this rapid drop in funding. And that was like highly concerning. But if you actually look into it, there's not like a political change in funding or anything that happened. It was that other institutes started prioritizing health disparities to understand the mechanisms behind them and the solutions for them. And then a whole new loan repayment category was developed also around that time. And so when you look at the dashboard, if you don't have some of that historical context, you might be concerned that, oh, this loan, this category isn't well funded, or I don't have a good success rate. And it is really about you and your research that's important, not the loan category you're applying to. The REACH award is a new award that's come through. Each institute and center has different REACH priorities. You can check them if you're interested in it. But really what you should be doing is again, reaching out to your institute or center contact. And I would, again, you have a list of immediate to-do items for today. One of those is today, finding out who your contact is and reaching out to them to plan a phone call or a Zoom meeting to talk with them. My experience, and I think most people's experience, is that NIH contacts are really great about supporting investigators. That is their interest, is in helping to grow science, and that means grow investigators. But they don't want to send you an email where you're like going to study it like word for word like a lawyer about what each word means. They really just want to talk with you, find out your priorities, and let you know the areas where you can grow and you can further develop your application. So REACH, sounds like a cool subcategory, but really you shouldn't change your research to try to fit a loan repayment program. It should be research you're already committed to. You can't write to a specific loan repayment program. They change on many factors. They change from year to year at times even. You should really be following what your research passion is and what your research path is, and using that to apply for a loan repayment program. I am sure that everybody listening to this call has projects that are important and have a home at the NIH. Right? And the key to a successful application is not about choosing the right subcategory to apply for. It's having a structured, mentored, and financially supported program in some way. Right? It doesn't necessarily have to be NIH supported, but it should be funded through some kind of competitive mechanism in some way. And so part of this is making sure that everybody who is contributing towards your application, like your mentor or your letter writers, stay on point. You might want to offer talking points or outlines about what your career goals are, what your training activities are, and make sure that that's consistent throughout your application. There's nothing worse than having like a wonderful application and then having a letter of support that goes with it that doesn't even seem like it's talking about the same person, right? And you want to try to control the message on that and not make this more complicated for the reviewers to try to figure out what's real and what's not real in your application. So the tips, right? Again, know your funding priorities, but contact your institutional and center contact ASAP. Other things, talk yourself up. You shouldn't be applying for a loan repayment program if like this is the only research project you ever plan on doing and that you don't have plans for, moving up the funding pathway and eventually submitting an R01. The reviewers don't want to hear about like the institutional K and then the K and then the R that you're going to apply for. They want to hear about what your eventual independent plan is. They want to hear about the R01 that you do plan on applying for. You should make sure that you have the right mentor for this, someone who's successfully mentored researchers in the past, and then talk up your environment and your mentor, why it's a good place for you to be as a growing researcher. Do good research. And, this isn't necessarily a critique of your research plan in this award. You should already have a research plan that has funding in some way if you're applying for this. But if you have a research plan that just is not supported by any background evidence or isn't rigorous in how it's describing your methods, it's going to be a red flag that your mentor isn't helping you. And that's a concern to the reviewers for this program. Again, select the right letter reviewers or letter writers. Make sure that they're actually going to submit the letters. You want people that care about your growth individually and that will submit this on time. And I think the last thing, which is particularly difficult for emergency clinicians who are also clinical investigators, is to make sure you leave sufficient time to review your documents before you submit them, right? You don't want glaring typos. You don't want inconsistent naming throughout your document. All of those speak to grantsmanship and time that you have available to dedicate towards your research. And errors like that really imply that you don't have sufficient time to be conducting rigorous research or to be developing your research skills. A common issue for very junior investigators is a slim publication records. You don't have to highlight this, they can tell, right? A reviewer can see that you just don't have that many publications. Rather than saying, I have a slim publication record, really emphasize what you're currently doing, what manuscripts you have in progress, what your publication plans are, and ask your mentor to highlight this in their description and their reference letter of your publication plans and how they're supporting you in this area. Some common myths about the loan repayment program that I just want to dispel, and these are direct off the Ambassador website. So I did not create these myths. These are the myths that are flying around everywhere. One is that you have to have an NIH grant to participate in the loan repayment program. That's not true. You need to have a project that is substantial and has feasible funding. A competitive award is obviously more, shows a greater commitment to research than startup funds that you might have received just through your university. But this any type of supported research qualifies. It does not have to be NIH supported research. You sometimes hear, I already talked about this, but I want to bring it up again, that you have to that you can't have the loan repayment on the public service loan forgiveness, and that's not true. The loan repayment program makes payments on your loans on your behalf, which count towards your public service loan forgiveness qualifying payments. That it's only for early research career scientists is another thing that I've heard, that it really is just for people on K awards or their first couple of years as faculty. Again, not true. Established investigators are eligible to apply. However, they have to meet the educational debt ratio and additionally have to show like how this is helping keep them into a research pathway. So it's a little less compelling for people who are not early stage investigators, but it doesn't exclude them. The loan repayment program is not only for PhDs. I successfully applied for one when I had a master's. It is more about keeping people in clinical clinical investigator pathway and keeping them away from the lure of private practice. And the last is that applicants can only apply for one renewal award. That isn't true. You can apply until you run out of debt, as long as you initially, your first award, you met that debt to income ratio. You can continue to apply for as long as you have educational debt until your debt is paid in full. And that includes undergraduate as well as graduate work. This slide I'm just keeping because when I send the slides to be disseminated with it, I want people to have this like kind of checklist. But what it shows you is that if you have a training award that you've prepared and submitted somewhere, you essentially have your loan repayment proposal drafted out. There's a little bit of editing that has to happen. You know, you can't just submit the same documents, but you've done a lot of the brain work and the work of preparing that training award proposal, which would work for a mentored loan repayment award proposal. And if you want more information, there's general information on the website. There's a detailed instruction guide, a many page detailed instruction guide that you can access. And then for the assist computer program specifically, there's help with that if you're having any issues with getting onto the website or navigating it. So that is what I've prepared on this topic.
Right. Thank you both.
Yeah.
I will open it up if there are any questions from the audience, but I actually have a couple questions and things that I was hoping to get input from both you and Dr. Korn. So the first question that I have is how, in thinking about the funding, or maybe this shouldn't come into any consideration, but how is the funding divvied up between institutes? Who decides that? Is it based on applicant pools or any insight into that?
Do you know the answer, Liz? I don't know the answer to that. You know, I can tell you that NINDS has more money in the loan repayment pot than we have people to spend it on. That's not true of every institute. And I have no idea where those allocations come from.
That's very helpful because I know sometimes when we think about putting grants together, we look at the pay line and that kind of stuff, but it sounds like that's not really an issue for the loan repayment.
I think they are. I think it is budgeted between institutes and centers to some extent. And then the new like loan repayment category awards that came, you know, have been established, or I believe by act of Congress, you know, as in much of the NIH, there's, you know, an act that requires an act of Congress to get more money, right? Well, it actually does. So that's why it's important to reach out to your contact at your institute or center of interest and actually ask about these things. You know, like, is there, you know, a better award to be applying for this particular institute? They all are going to operate a little bit differently. They're reviewed within the institute and center. And so I wish I had my mentees have worked for NINDS right now. But I think that that's important information for people to know is that there isn't a blanket statement that applies. You do need to reach out. And I think the other thing too is that if it turns out that this isn't the year for somebody to apply, this is an annual award. And so you have time to kind of get your ducks in a row and apply again next year. If you're rushing an application that's not going to be prepared this year, it might be better to take that time and prepare an award for the following year.
Perfect.
If I could just add something to that too, and Liz, you've said a couple of things in your talk that was great, and I'm going to sort of put an exclamation on a couple of things that you said. You said be careful when you're looking at data, and they provide a lot of data, and I think it's dangerous. You said it was dangerous. I think people would be better off if they couldn't see it, because it gives you ideas that aren't true, and there should be no extraneous considerations. If you don't apply, then you have no chance of getting your debt paid off. And if you do apply, you have a much better chance than if you don't apply. And it's not so difficult that it's not worth your time, right? There's not so little money that it's not worth it. You should all be applying if you have debt. And even if it's too early, I mentioned reasons you don't get it, so apply and you don't get it. It's an easy application as applications go. And there just should be no extraneous situations that say, oh, it's not worth applying. If I could just get in one more statement that wasn't about your question, Lane, but
Please.
Liz, you mentioned, don't apply for a particular LRP award. Don't tailor your research towards the award or towards an institute. I agree with that. I would say that for all grants you ever write to anybody, anywhere. What people don't want to believe, but has always been true, is that money follows good research. The research should not be following the money. You don't apply for money and then say, oh, well, I'll do research with that money. You do good research, you will get money. Of course, you have to write a good application. And that, as Liz said, requires time, but it also, we have a saying in our office that if you can't write it clearly, you haven't thought it clearly. And you need to know what you're talking about. And that takes time too. It's not easy. So anyway, I just want to make those 2 points.
Yeah, I definitely think my thoughts aren't crystallized until I've written them down. And so sometimes that's why writing is the most painful part. And sometimes it's very easy. And it really has to do with the prep work that goes into it. But I do want to give some time context to this. When I converted, I believe it was my institutional K award to a loan repayment application. And it took me, let's see, 4 straight hours. I had small children at the time and my parents were babysitting. And so I had 4 hours to get it done. And so I had most of it done within 4 hours. And then the work, some work editing and checking in with my letter writers. And so overall, it was definitely less than a 20-hour process to prepare this application. And I think it was probably less than that. Had I waited till my K-23 award to apply for it, I would have had a much clearer research plan and would have been even faster. And so this, if you already have a training award proposal written, this is a very fast grant application. You're not expected to develop a new project. You should be using the project that's already supported. And so that's the way that it's different. And then I did want to speak to what you said, Dr. Korn, about not applying to where not taking your research where the money is. I think actually the worst thing is when you get a grant for a project that you don't want to do, right? Because then you're committing yourself to hundreds and hundreds of hours on a project that you didn't actually want to do. You were just following the money. And that's, that's not a way to keep yourself in clinical research. That's going to really burn you out pretty quickly if you're doing work that you're not even interested in for less money than you would do in private practice somewhere. So that will defeat the purpose if you attack it that way.
Yeah, I think that was a really important thing. It was something that when I first applied to the loan repayment, I didn't quite fully understand of I could actually use a grant that I had already written for this application. So I do want to highlight that for people because I think there is a common notion out there that you need a different project or a different spin on it. And that does not need to be the case is what I'm hearing here.
But just as a warning, the flip side of what Liz said, if you have not written a document that serves as a grant, it's going to take you more than 4 hours. It's going to take you more than 20 hours. And one of the reasons that I didn't mention, I made a slide and actually deleted it, but we get a lot of slop in the door for all grant mechanisms, but for the LRP too. And they're thrown together quickly. They're incoherent. Not quite often, but it's not infrequent that the research is a cut and paste of the mentor's grant aims. You're dead in the water if you do that. Writing a project for the first time takes real time. As grants go or, documents go, the loan repayment document is pretty easy. But that doesn't mean it's not going to take time if you've never done it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's an easy award to apply for if you already have supported research that you are leading at least that sub aim for. It's not easy to apply for if you're writing for a project from scratch that you have no support for and has never been reviewed by anyone else and you haven't gotten feedback from reviewers. Then it's more than a weekend of work then. So.
Yeah. So along those lines, I know Dr. Korn, you emphasized the same thing with Dr. Berner, the kind of the preference for someone who has a K award already is a little bit better than someone who has startup funds, just because it's demonstrating that you're on a path to long-term research career. How or is there any difference when you look at someone who has a career development award from an institution or a foundation that's not NIH compared to a K award? Is there any preference there or any thoughts of how that differs in the application?
I can only speak for NINDS, and the answer is we don't care. All we care about, we are trying to retain you in research. And we couldn't care less where your money comes from. In fact, it's much better for us if you're doing research in our mission and somebody else is paying for it. So we just don't care. It's just not even looked at.
Perfect. And then kind of my last question here for you guys. So one of the things that I'm part of with SAM is the ARM Med Ed program, where they're looking at medical education research. One of the things that we've come across is kind of how to fit that into NIH portfolios or how to get additional funding for that type of research. I do think it's an important topic of research out there, but I'm curious what your thoughts are, if you have suggestions for those type of researchers who may not be on an NIH pathway, other thoughts for them.
I don't.
Fair enough.
This does.
And can you clarify a little bit? You mean for people on a medical education research pathway or educational research pathway?
Just because it seems like the funding options are a little bit lower, so it's harder to meet that initial bar of having independent or mentored research funding. So you
and I think it is important that we have strong medical education research, but that jump you need to make that I think would make it more clearly aligned with the research priorities of different NIH institutes and centers is the clinical relevance of that education. That isn't always a jump that's made in people's work, especially earlier in their career, is how the medical education is relevant to clinical outcomes downstream. Like that's the premise, right? We believe better educated providers will provide better clinical care and we'll have better clinical outcomes. But I think you have to make a really compelling case for that to be successful on this. The loan repayment program is to retain people in research so that they will become independent NIH researchers. And so you have to have a pathway towards that and what your current research agenda is. Like that is the overall purpose of it. That is helpful.
Perfect. I appreciate that tip for those researchers. Any last thoughts? I really appreciate both of you for taking time today to speak about this program. I think it's an important and very valuable way to support our young investigators.
I mean, I don't have any last thoughts other than what we've already said, which is apply.
Yeah.
And write a good one, which is the same advice we give no matter what grant you're writing. Right? It's not a lottery. And you're asking for money. And when you ask for money, you should write a careful document. So that would be my only advice.
On behalf of SAM, I just want to thank each of you for participating. Very useful information. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we can wrap it up. Bye, everyone.